Well, as always, it's lovely to be here. It is Wednesday, which means Vortex F1 Racing League goes racing once again in realistic cars. The drivers today, Pesh, Jack, Dan, Onions, Majin, Jan, Suzuki, Wilco, Idle North, Northover, Bruno, Dan Richards, and Vikings. And today, it's sunny Montreal that we're going round. A very technical circuit, very difficult for track limits, but also one of the shortest. Second only to, I believe, Monaco and Austria. With lap times in qualifying averaging around 1 minute 9 seconds, if you're there. And speaking of qualifying, that's exactly where we find ourselves right now. And as usual, Suzuki, first one out of the pit lane in the Haas. Take a look at the telemetry at the bottom and you'll see how gently they're taking this outlap. Tyres are a big concern in the race. There's 35 laps, if I'm not mistaken, which means looking after tyres not only is a concern in the race, but also with the technicality of the track, the fast turns. In qualifying, if you overdo them on the outlap, they'll have nothing left for the fast lap itself. So that's how you can see. Gentle on the steering, getting some heat in, but not too much, and gentle on the braking. Lots of lifting, only reaching about 60% brake pressure. Under what will be one of the harshest braking zones of the entire circuit. So while every driver, save for Onions, is now on an outlap, is that Vikings, who's already started the lap for the first time ever. Someone before Suzuki has started their lap, so we'll follow him through turn 3, Pont de la Concorde. Of course, turn names in French or in French-speaking Canada. Through turn 6, lots of inside curb. Purple sector 1, of course. First one to do it. Braking for T8. As his sector 1 is beaten. Yellow sector 2, or purple. So sector 2 is beaten. Nice and smooth through turn 13 and 14 by the Wall of Champions. The dreaded wall that many F1 World Champions have unfortunately crashed into. And it's a 1 minute 10 seconds, .839 that goes first on the board. Suzuki following up now, pushing it far more. Hits the Wall of Champions with the exit. That's a 1 minute 10.055. Now without that collision at the end, I dare say it would have been in the 1 minute 9s. Pesh goes second with a 10.345. That's not me counting, that's really the time. Dan Richards beats Suzuki by 4 milliseconds, a 10.051. With a caution in sector 3, most likely people getting out of the way. There's Northover. Next one across the line, through the Wall of Champions. He goes 5th with a 10.937. He's not the only one though. Idle North with an 11.5. Wilco with a 10.955. Bruno with a 12.268. Dan W with a 10.9. Some very safe lap times to start with, just to make sure they're valid laps. As I said before, track limits are a concern, and especially in qualifying, if you waste one of your 3 opportunities by going off the track, then you haven't got a lap at all. Now turn 6 and 7 for Onions, please. Now turns 8 and 9. The rear did just step out a little bit under the entry. As you can see, very harsh braking for the hairpin. And a slide on the exit again. Struggling to get back on throttle is Onions. Look at the green tracer on the telemetry. You can see up, down, up, down, up, down. Too hesitant. The initial spike too high up. Forced him to correct. Turning in for the Wall of Champions. Narrowly dodges it. And over the line. It's P4 for him with a 10.501. Everyone right now either on an in-lap or in the pit lane. So that's our first round done. Jack and Jan may have failed to do their laps or didn't go out for them at all. I believe they did indeed go out for one, so it just must have been invalid. And Suzuki, as usual, back on an outlap. He doesn't wait for the end of the session, he simply goes when there's a gap. Through turns 1 and 2, nice and smooth. The throttle a little bit jumpy on the exit of turn 2, but overall okay. Straight back on it for Pont de la Concorde. And it's a purple sector 1, beating down Richards by just under a tenth. This can be attributed a bit to the track being warmed up, but there's going to have to be some more improvement there if he wants to maintain any advantage he may gain here. A great change in direction through turn 9. The car seemed very well pinned through the track. Now almost 2/10 of improvement into the hairpin. The exit here absolutely crucial. You can see much smoother on throttle than we saw from Onions. Maybe a little bit under the limit, in fact. You can never tell. Now the Wall of Champions. He hit it last time. Very much cutting the inside of turn 13. A great line. And this time, it's a 1 minute 9.703. A 3/10 improvement to take provisional pole from Suzuki. That's the kind of lap that he knew he could do. Pesh, currently on a green sector 1, yellow sector 2. Coming up to the Wall of Champions now, comes into the pits, in fact. Not happy with his lap time, I presume. There's Dan Richards. Invalidated his second attempt at a lap. You can see the red sector there. That's not good news for him. Northover, currently P6, the Aston Martin with a 10.9. One of 3 drivers to have a time that starts with that. But he has also invalidated this lap. You can see the difficulty starting to creep in when drivers push. Drivers coming back in now. Majin, however, going for it. Currently with an 11.9. Green sector 1. That's a personal best. We've seen much better pace from Majin before. We can't wait to see it again. Not a personal best in sector 2, but still looking quite smooth. The brakes are a little bit tenuous there, you can see. Applied and reapplied over the course of the braking zone. Great line through Wall of Champions, maybe with just a little more room to push, and over the line. What's it going to be for Lil Majin? An 11.5. So, there's one more chance for him to improve that next time around. Now what about Wilco? Currently on an invalid lap. Is he going to come into the pits? Yes, he is. Bruno now through turn 6. But it's also invalid for him. The Ferrari struggling just as much as anyone else with these track limits. Dan Richards now. Notably, down to P3 as Onions did a 9.90. The second sub 1 minute 10 second time of the session. But Dan Richards has waited his sweet time. Been very patient to go out for his lap. He's now taking it very, very smoothly. He's preparing in all ways possible. Through the Wall of Champions now, getting as good a run as possible. Because it's the start-finish straight. Leads you onto the start of the lap. Hanging to the right-hand side of the track for turn 1. Missed the inside curve just a little bit. Will compromise the line for turn 2. It's all about the exit, though. Throttle's good, but it's a spin and a slide. The traction not quite there. And unfortunately, chances of this lap being good enough are very low. He's 4/10 too slow in Sector 1 alone. Waited so long to give it a go, and through turn 9 invalidates just a little too far over that inside curb. Suzuki then, currently our pole sitter. The very same sequence of corners. How will this sector time look? Hanging to the right, it is a purple sector 1 by 0.04 of a second. Very, very smooth. Turn 8, now 9. And as usual, a great moment to change direction halfway through. The chicane beautifully navigated. Hairpin. Carrying speed, you don't need to take the curb there. You can just flow around it. And it's a purple sector 2. As Pesh and Jan retire. Jan not managing to put down a lap time. And through the Wall of Champions, Suzuki improves the run even more. Pins the throttle once again, and it's a pole position improvement. 9.574. Another 0.2 taken off of it. There's now 0.4 between him and this man right here, Onions Police. Doing his outlap now. While the track will continue to warm up and be covered with rubber, Suzuki has finished all 3 of his attempts. So at least that's on Onion's side. Vikings was on a lap of himself, of his own, sorry. And as Vikings comes into the pits, it's Onions finishing his outlap. Ready to go for one final time. And that's the timing line. Hanging to the right-hand side of the track for the sharp turn in of turn 1. Taking much more inside curb. And a great line through turn 2. A little bit of a flick. And straight back on throttle, burning battery. Was on 100% through the first two corners, now down to 90. Touch of the brakes for turn 3 and 4. Covering the inside curb and straight lining the chicane as much as possible. Again to the right hand side of the track. Wheels on the painted line. And it's a great purple sector 1. Over a 10th of improvement on Suzuki. It's looked absolutely perfect. Perfection in the first part. Now, the sector time now 2.5 tenths of improvement on Suzuki. Bear in mind, this is not improvement on his own time, it's improvement on Suzuki's. So a new session best in the first 2/3 of the track. Burning the battery down the main straight now, this is what it was all saved for. Down to 20%, 15%, 10% for the Wall of Champions. A little bit of a lift through the middle of the corner, was it enough to maintain the lead? It was indeed 109.377 for Onions Please. An astounding lap from an astounding driver. Nearly perfect from start to finish. The only area of improvement would be the final few corners, the lift in turns 13 and 14. Dan Richards now giving it a go. Struggles through the turn-ins of turn 8 and 9 into yellow sector 1. Doesn't yet rival the time of Onions. And he's 7 tenths too slow. McLaren finding himself in 3rd place. Narrowly avoids the Wall of Champions, but over the line. Not much improvement to be had. In fact, no improvement to be had. It was a purple sector 3, but it wasn't enough. Idle North going for a lap of his own now. Only 1/10 or so to improve if he wants to get 3rd place, or 4th place, sorry. There are calls for Dan Richards' fall-off to be studied. However, I'd say give him time. We have a 35-lap race ahead of us. Anything can happen. You never know. And into the pits comes Idle North. Wilco doing the same. Imagine the only driver left who has not taken the checkered flag, giving himself some leisure time around the track. And into the pits he comes. And as the Williams mechanics take him in, that will mark the end of our qualifying session. So, our starting grid for the Canadian Grand Prix, the 13 drivers we were given, have shaken up as follows. Onions at the front, followed by Suzuki next to him, Dan Richards and Pesh on the second row, Idle North, Dan W following in 5th and 6th, Wilco in 7th, followed by Vikings, the second Mercedes in 8th, Northover, the second Aston Martin in 9th, Jack in 10th, Margin and Bruno 11th and 12th, and Jan, the only driver not to set a lap, bringing up the rear. As we're given a beautiful view of the pit lane, the drivers are given some time to prepare. So, there will be no formation lap this time around. We'll be readying up in 2 minutes' time. And we'll go straight into the action. And if 2 minutes is just too long for the Generation Z brain to wait, then pull up Clash Royale before the real spectacle begins. And as we get ready to go, that's 3, 4, 5 red lights. As the Sauber on the front row heads away, it's Onions Please, spinning the wheels. But Suzuki doesn't quite get the jump into turn 1, tries to go for the inside, it's not quite there. A little bit of scuffling in the fight behind. The Mercedes of Idle North tries to go around the outside of Pesh, doesn't quite find it either. The Mercedes of Wilco and Dan W go side by side into turn 4. Wilco pulls ahead. And the second Mercedes and second Aston Martin of Viking and Northover are still side by side into turn 5. Ultimately, Vikings takes it. Nice and clean through the first sector. Well navigated by the grid generally. But it's still Onions Please. It's in the lead. It's still extremely close though, as the Mercedes and Aston Martin fight continues. Northover seeking any way past. And that is one lap done. Suzuki dips his wheels in the grass just a little bit on the exit there, leaves himself vulnerable to Dan Richards. Forces Suzuki to cover the inside, compromises his own line for turn 2, goes a little bit deep at the apex. You can see how safely they're taking these corners now compared to in qualifying. The track limits are absolutely vital. Again, a little bit of wheels in the grass action for the McLaren. And the front three remain stuck together. This exit determines all, with DRS now activated. The rear wings open, and Suzuki takes his chance, flies past Onions. Dan Richards does the same on the inside into turn 13, holds his line, and that's 2 positions down for Onions. Vikings gets the first 3-second penalty of the race. It was to be expected that somebody would. Suzuki takes fastest lap now. DRS almost certainly having aided him in that. A little bit of engine stuttering. As the traction is found. Across the grid, only 2 brakes in DRS just towards the back. But for most, DRS is omnipresent. Onions now within 2/10 of Dan Richards. Looks like he wants to get back what he lost. Again, a slide on the exit. We saw this from him in qualifying. The traction has not improved. It might be a setup thing. As both cars with DRS close in now. Dan Richards gets close, but no overtakes this time. Shockingly so. There's a second DRS straight down into turn 1. Dan Richards looks like he's going to go for it. Does not. Plays it safe. Takes fastest lap, though, in the meantime. And the Suzuki has a wobble. The cars behind only close in. We're seeing more gaps in DRS appear now as Idle North loses access to 4th place. 1.2 seconds ahead of him means no DRS next time around. Wilco behind him similarly. Dan W, though, stuck behind him within a few tenths. As the Ferrari struggles through turn 7. DRS active here as well. And this is where I would not want to be. Suzuki, look at the mirrors, either at the left or right. It doesn't matter which one you look at, it's the same thing. It's Dan Richards, whose McLaren flies past down the straight. What about Onions? Doesn't quite get the chance to do anything himself. Maybe next time, as Wilco gets the second time penalty for track limits. As Dan W gets the third. So the drivers in 6th, 7th and 8th, the only ones to receive time penalties for their end of race time so far. Dan Richards makes it the 4th, but he's the leader. So from 1st place, receives a penalty, takes the pressure off for both Suzuki and Onions. Now they know no overtake is necessary on track. Though Suzuki, coming under pressure from Onions, may feel the need to overtake as a means of defending himself, putting a car in between the two of them. Suzuki doesn't quite have the battery to make it work, though. Only 10% remaining, while Onions are awash with electrical energy, doing a much better job of harvesting. You can see gentle movements on the steering wheel to reduce the total amount of friction on these tyres. deltas are so close, as Vikings takes advantage of the mid-circuit DRS to get past Wilco, who's obviously struggling. These tyres not living up to their expectations. We're only 6 laps in, and traction is fading. In fact, quite obviously so, as Onions, around the outside, into turn 13, now takes the net lead. There's a second DRS zone down here, though, and it's all about battery. Onion stays ahead into turn 1, no room for Suzuki to make a dive. So the net lead of the race goes to the Sauber. After Dan Richards' 3-second penalty, Vikings gets his second penalty, making it 6 seconds total for him. But now 1 second between Dan Richards and Onions. Things spread out just a little bit over the course of that final sector. .4 seconds now, Onions visibly struggling. Can it be that after 8 laps these medium tyres are letting go? Maybe that Dan Richards knows. Well, as I was talking about the tyres, Idle North, Northover and Wilco all decide to get rid of their first set. Wilco has some front wing damage there, you can see, is replacing it. Now 1.5 seconds between the Sauber and the McLaren. And you have to think that that gap goes above 3 seconds, then you can say goodbye to the net lead. As both of them stay out, but the gap's now 2 seconds. Something is different between these two cars. Suzuki maintains DRS behind him, but our pole sitter cannot keep up. And in fact is really struggling to do so. Imagine up to P5 after these pit stops. We're going to take a look at the tyres really quickly. So Vikings and Magin started on the hards. Most others started on the mediums. And have now, we've had 5 drivers pit to the hard tyre. Jack and Jan have a little bit of a fight. Jan coming out on top with the new hard tyres, and Jack struggling severely with those mediums. And sliding into the wall for turn 6. The yellow flag, as that is the end plate of that front wing, missing. The front right end plate now gone after that collision with the wall. It really shows how difficult the tyres are getting to manage. And now Dan Richards comes into the pit, but the gap was 3.3 seconds as he did so. A slide for Onions there as well, which just shows how much of a good job they're doing managing it up at the front, 9 laps in. A 2-stop strategy seems inevitable as Jan gets a penalty to join Vikings, Dan Richards, Idle North, Jan 50, and Wilco. Jack retires in the pits after that incident with the wall at turn 5. So, although Onions is in the lead on the circuit, Dan Richards on the brand new hards is absolutely flying. Because of the tyre degradation around this circuit being so high, the undercut is invaluable. And it's now that Onions Please comes into the pit. Suzuki, however, continues on. 10 laps on those medium tyres, but he's not getting rid of them just yet. Dan, you can see, gaining every corner on Vikings at this point. He started on the hard tyres, and on the exit, Vikings goes wide. Dan Richards says thank you very much. DRS is active, but it certainly wasn't needed. So that's P2 for him now. As Onions Please has gone onto a second set of mediums instead of hard tyres. This is the same strategy that Pesh has taken. So P4 and 5 on the same strategy. Suzuki now coming in for hard tyres. So it looks like medium, hard, medium for most of the grid. Unless we're considering medium, hard, one stop. However, Onions has given away his strategy by going to the mediums and confirms that there is no option for him but a two-stop, because of course you have to use two different types of tyre. Esh, though, gaining on these mediums on Vikings. Dan Richards has already found his way through and is in the lead. But Pesh does this himself. Onions Please, though, following through. Or at least would like to, but does not have the battery available. Instead, brakes a little bit early to get a better run. And down the run into turn 1, doesn't have it. Still, the top speed on that Mercedes, outdoing the Sauber. A little bit of wheel bumping into turn 2 as they go side by side. Oh, as Vikings had a little bit of a spin there, I believe. His nose ended up somewhere it probably could do with not have being. Is the car okay? We have both end plates, so at most minor damage. It's now Onions fighting for the lead that he started with. And is now second place. 6 seconds though. A whole 6 seconds behind Dan Richards. One undercut turned a 2.5 second gap into 6 seconds. As Magic gets a second penalty. The word second is being said a lot. And now, the gap may just be insurmountable. But it's still far from over. Let's keep an eye on the driver who started as another front runner, Suzuki. Flying past Vikings into turn 3. The driver who started on the hard tyres, noticeably slower at this stage. But Suzuki, who stayed out just one lap more, is another 5.6 seconds behind Onions. So you can see how one lap of undercut has made a huge difference to the strategy of these drivers. So much so that nobody is currently eligible for DRS because nobody is within a second of anybody else. Imagine having started on the hards, now ditches them for mediums. As much as I'd like to say this seems a little bit like a time trial, it is far from that for any of the drivers. Dan Richards urgently trying to give himself a lead to defend against the penalty that he has given himself. When strategies equal out, this penalty may come back to bite him, which is the last thing he wants. Onions trying to mitigate tyre management while also avoiding overdoing it. Avoiding going too slow. He needs to get close as possible to Dan Richards, but not at the cost of his tyres. But now it's 8.3 seconds between the two. .6 seconds. The gap only widens. It seems that the hard tyre may just be a better race tyre. And Suzuki finds himself defending against Pesh, who went to the mediums. Wilco gets another penalty. And Pesh struggled to keep up just then. The gap goes a little bit wider, as now it's 9.3 seconds between Onions and Dan Richards. Absolute insanity from the Delta. Nearly 10 seconds. All you can do is watch as the numbers get higher. And somehow, some way, Dan Richards is pulling out an insane lead. in absolute flow state. An absolute menace on the track is this McLaren. .5 seconds. It's almost impossible to believe. It's Jan now, the Red Bull, the only driver on the track to be eligible for the DRS. A little bit of a clash with the Wall of Champions. And that's a slide. From Jan in turn 7, the braking just too difficult for the left-hander. Caused Northover to have to stop as well. We're glad that he did so in the interests of safety. Onions and Dan Richards could not be further apart at this moment. 12.1 seconds. What has Dan Richards eaten? Because there is something crazy going on with this car. An absolutely insane driving performance right now. There are simply no words to describe what it is that Dan Richards is doing to the Delta on this grid. They pitted at similar times, but do not let that make you think that there would be any close racing between the two of them, as they're completely shut down. By Dan Richards himself, whose name cannot be said enough this race. Pesh finding himself a fight and a half. Idle North ahead with 13 laps of tyre advantage. This should not be a very difficult one. Of course, Pesh, the first driver to pit for the second time, alongside Margin. And very well done by Pesh, quite easily dispatching the Mercedes. Onions now coming in for the second pit stop of this race. Or coming out of it, more accurately, comes out just ahead of Vikings. A second set of hards Or in fact the first set, as Onions has gone for medium, medium, hard. So, an attempt at an undercut it is, from the Sauber. Though he was far enough behind that it may not be considered a danger. The outlap is what matters. As Dan Richards, our race leader, comes into the pits from the lead of the race, and he will nearly come out back into it. We'll see now. As it's tied between him and Suzuki, he does come back out in the lead. And just away from a second on Suzuki. So no DRS for the Haas driver either. The pace is unreal. This pit stop starting to happen across the board. Pesh has already done it, but here comes, it's now Dan W having done one, Northover, Wilco, Jan, all coming in for the final set of tyres. And Suzuki with 11 laps of tyre disadvantage finds himself being gapped once again by the golden McLaren up front. As 2 seconds turns to 4. 4 turns to 5. Now, not to commentator's curse this one, but short of an incident, Dan Richards has almost got very little work to do now, but cruise. Idle North, one of the final ones to come in for pits. Expecting the same from Suzuki and Bruno any minute now. But Suzuki stays out. Dan Richards continues his reign of terror on this track. 4 seconds turn to 5, 5 turn to 6, 6 turn to 7, 7 turn to 8, 8 turn to 9, and now we're on 10 seconds of delta It's unbelievable. But it's happening before our eyes. And Idle North, a few laps tyre advantage on Majin ahead. Of course, a different tyre compound as well. With DRS now down the back straight. It looks like two different classes of cars. Through goes the Mercedes. But he gets a 3-second penalty there for multiple warnings of track limits. Onions finds himself suddenly in contention with Suzuki. Of course, Suzuki having not pitted. And with 7 laps to go, most likely would struggle to go without doing it again. And there we go, move made. But now Suzuki with a penalty, and Majin with another one. So the only person on the grid right now without a race penalty is Onions Please in second. Most people in their own races right now. And Idle North fighting for DRS on Northover. With DRS finally now on the inside into the Wall of Champions. He didn't quite find himself alongside enough, but maybe this is his chance on the exit. DRS active for a second time, down the inside into turn 1, late braking side by side, and over the curb the Aston pulls a little bit ahead. Now turn 2, the Mercedes on a wider line, tries to carry more speed, but it's not there for him, and it's a no. But then again, the track's so short, DRS comes every minute. And this time, it's much more persuasive. North flying past. Suzuki still refusing to pit again from P3. Instead, trying to stick on these tyres. As we have one more retirement, as Jan leaves it there in the pit lane. Done enough racing today. And around we go. The north and north over. Once again going at it. The two norths. With DRS, the order's going to change once again, but no. Gives it another go. Overcooks the entry into turn 13 a little bit. This time just slightly too far away. And overcooks the entry again in turn 10. Doesn't quite carry the speed required. Down the back straight. Two norths remain as is. And too deep under braking again. The braking catching out Idle North here. He's struggling to follow. As Wilco now behind him catches up the Ferrari, wanting a piece of this action for P7 or P8. No, it is P7. But Idle North now having lost DRS. Means P7 might just be out of reach. Again, the Mercedes really struggling on entry. But what about on exit? DRS not active for Idle North, but it is active for Wilco, who closes in down the straight. Closes in, but not overtake. As Wilco gets himself a warning, trying to go for that quick switchback with an alternate line into turn 5. The move looks good. A little bit of wheel banging on the inside. Goes wide. Doesn't quite carry the speed. So another penalty for Watt as Dan Richards from 3rd place on the grid takes our victory today. Onions Please following behind. The pole sitter recovering from an early loss to 3rd, and Suzuki, who went 24 laps on one set of tyres, comes P3. Pesh comes 4th, Viking 5th. Dan W comes through the wall of champion chicane now. And that is the end of our race session. Canada, a track that brings out a driver's skill. And so sometimes we see absolutely dominant performances like this. A race to remember for Dan Richards. As the McLaren finds itself so far in the lead, you'd think we were watching a real race. As Dan Richards, of course, wins. Pesh takes fastest lap. Vikings driver of the day. Imagine most overtakes and Onions. The only driver without the penalty takes the cleanest driver. And Vikings went from 8th to 5th, but Dan Richards, because of his dominant performance, 16 seconds ahead, I would give the driver of the day today. Beautifully done. The finishing order is as follows. Thank you everyone who raced, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time around.